Welcome to the BG3 Modding with Moon Glasses tutorial on fade groups. Fade groups are used to control a location's visuals as the player moves their camera around by telling objects to disappear. The most common use of this is hiding the first floor or the roof of a building when the player is on the ground floor. You can find the fade sidebar group on all items, constructs and scenery. While these work, the best practice is to use a fade trigger. Fade triggers are dedicated areas that dynamically assign and control the objects inside them. However, they are not the most straightforward things to set up, so let's go over how you can set one up on a 2-story building. For this tutorial, I've made a simple house with 2 stories and filled it with some spontaneous decorations just to prove the fade trigger working. In preparation, I have also set all the furniture inside the house to fadeable and hierarchy fade only in their fade group. When setting up a fade trigger, I like to think of its functionality into 2 different kinds of fade triggers, an area trigger and a check trigger. Let me explain. Area triggers are what you expect the trigger to be used for. They cover an area of the things you want to hide. For the first floor, we'll pull out a fade trigger and use the edit shape bounds to draw our main block of the house. To set this up to be an area trigger, turn on ignore raycast and give it an ID of your choice. You can set up as many area triggers as you like, as long as they share the same ID. They will all combine to act as one area. Check triggers are fade triggers that check the player and camera position to see if their attached fade ID should start fading or not. Pull out a new trigger and use edit shape bounds to spread it under the first floor. Because this checks both the player position and the camera, we'll use this to determine when the transition happens. You can also assign the ID via right click and add to fade group, so you make sure you get the spelling correct. The fade group will reappear when the player character's feet enter any trigger with this ID, so load the check trigger until it covers the area you want for the transition. This is already working as a check trigger, but we'll add the things inside the trigger to the fade group. We can disable this by turning on fade group only in the fade sidebar. This means that only the objects in the same ID will fade, which should be none of them. Just like area triggers, you can set up multiple check triggers, assuming these settings are the same. To iterate and showcase, you should have area triggers covering everything on the top floor, and check triggers are just under that floor. All of these triggers for this floor should share the same ID. Here you can say I've done the same for the roof with a different ID. So you can better understand how this works, the raycast the fade trigger is talking about is a straight line between your camera and the player's feet. If your check trigger intersects this line without the character being inside the trigger, it knows it's in the way and everything should fade. The reason we need to use a check trigger in the first place is that for some reason, triggers that have ignore raycast disabled will isolate them and not listen to other fade triggers with the same ID. That's why we split these into 2 groups, one controlling checker, one activating area. You can verify this raycast by stretching your check trigger to be outside the building and standing under it. As you can see here, I have these beams highlighting the trigger area, and as the camera cuts into the trigger, the fade trigger of the building next to us activates. You can actually do this intentionally if your map requires it. To ensure you've given all your triggers the correct ID, you can click here and open the Fade Hierarchy Editor. Here you can check your fades and ensure they have the correct IDs, set their hierarchies, and rename them if you use a temporary name. Finally, to ensure you get the Lava Studio certified look, select your walls of your building and turn on Can See Through Walls. This lets an area of the wall fade out rather than the entire wall itself. This allows the bounds of the space to remain complete without sacrificing visual clarity. You can also do this on large objects and other structural components if you believe the space would benefit from it. Your space should now dynamically change what appears. Feel free to add more triggers for your roof and adjust triggers as you need. To note, you do not need to split your triggers like this if one trigger is enough, such as hiding a small bit of roof when walking upstairs, such as this house in Act 3. While we're on the topic of camera presentation, let's quickly discuss caves, cliffs, and dungeons. Caves are often made up with hundreds of individual rocks, and you want to ensure that the player remains within the bounds of your play space if the area is large enough. You can ensure this by turning on Collide with Camera. If your rocks are in the play space and yet you want the camera to respect their space in the world, I suggest turning on Allow Camera Movement. It allows the camera to act as if it were terrain. However, for some reason this also forces the camera to be allowed to clip, even if the previous setting was disabled. I suggest using fade groups and camera see-through options to hide this clipping as much as possible. You may notice that constructs don't have these options. Dungeons are often much smaller spaces and much more cramped, and thus Laren allows the player to see out of bounds. However, to ensure visual clarity, they use general black decals to cover everything out of bounds with them. This lets you have the see-through property construct without fading the entire structure, while also giving the freedom of camera movement. This method is used in almost all of the game's caves rather than the actual blocking of the cameras, due to most of the caves being fairly small. This technique is also used in Act 3 out in the open world. Within the city walls to hide areas you shouldn't be able to see. If you're crafty with these techniques, no matter where your player or camera is, your gameplay will be as clear as day to showcase your stunning world that you've made. That's it for this video. Next up we'll be exploring player interaction, but until then, Happy modding.